A new claim is shaking music history. Janet Jackson says Jay-Z didn't just compete with Michael, he betrayed him. She hints there was a hidden plan to box Michael in, control his moves, and silence his power. Why now? Because the pieces finally line up: money, influence, and the catalog that made Michael more than an artist.
Working with emotion, and I actually had to walk out of the room. So it was just too much for me to handle.
So, do you blame Dr. Murray for your brother's death?
Yes, I do. He is the one that was administering the drug, as from what I do know. So.
If true, this isn't simple industry drama. It's a blueprint for how a legend gets isolated while others rise. But remember, these are allegations, not a verdict. Still, the timing, the whispers, and the sudden shifts are hard to ignore. So we're asking the question on everyone's mind: was Michael pushed into danger while the world looked the other way? We'll follow the trail from family warnings to business deals and late-night calls that don't add up. But that wasn't the whole story, because what came next would turn rumors into a storm and force powerful names into the spotlight. Stay with me. This is where the pattern starts to show.
One person I believe in Hollywood who people conspired to actually take down because he had too much power, and I believe that person was Michael Jackson. The reason I believe that is because you can look into the story. Paul McCartney and Michael used to be real cool. Paul was telling Michael, like, yo, you gotta get your business together, you gotta get your business right. Michael ended up getting so big that he bought the Beatles publishing. The Beatles publishing was worth so much that literally Sony gave Michael Jackson half of their publishing company just to own the Beatles catalog. Imagine how powerful a black man is when he owns a majority of the music industry's publishing. In some cases, was even giving publishing back to some of the artists. He gave Little Richard his publishing back. I don't know how many people he did that to, but he gave Little Richard his publishing back. I believe that Michael Jackson had too much power in the music industry, had too much control over the most valuable asset in music, which is people's publishing, and I believe they had to take him out because of it.
When people talk about Michael Jackson, they usually call him the king of pop. They think of the moonwalk, the glitter glove, and the sold-out stadiums. But behind the spotlight, Michael was more than just an entertainer. He was a businessman with vision, and that vision gave him something few artists ever dreamed of owning: power over the very foundation of the music industry. Back in 1985, Michael made a move that stunned everyone. He bought ATV Music Publishing for around $47 million. Inside that catalog was the crown jewel, the Beatles' entire songbook. Imagine the kind of influence that brought him. Every time a Beatles song was played, covered, or licensed, Michael earned a piece. But it didn't stop there. Years later, Michael merged ATV with Sony, creating Sony ATV, one of the largest publishing catalogs in the world. He didn't just own songs, he owned leverage. We're talking about rights connected to artists like the Beatles, Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, and countless others. Even top pop stars like Beyoncé and Mariah Carey had material under that umbrella. For Michael, it wasn't only about money. He once returned Little Richard's publishing rights, showing he understood how much value was stolen from black artists in the industry. He wanted to balance the scales, to prove that artists could take back control from corporations. But that choice made him more than a superstar. It made him a threat, because once Michael sat at the table with the same power as billion-dollar labels, the game changed. Here's why that mattered. Music publishing is the engine that keeps the industry alive. Labels might control artists' contracts, but publishing controls the songs themselves. Whoever holds that catalog decides who can sing it, play it, or profit from it. And Michael held half of one of the most powerful catalogs on earth. He wasn't just playing the industry game, he was beating it. Insiders say this is where paranoia crept into Michael's life. Friends like producer Rodney Darkchild Jerkins remembered him speaking about living in fear, not of fans, not of tabloids, but of the suits who saw him as an obstacle. Owning half of Sony ATV meant Michael couldn't easily be pushed around. And in an industry built on controlling talent, that independence was dangerous.
You know, you always hear the conspiracy theories, like, you know, they be like, oh, Bill Cosby was trying to buy NBC.
Yeah.
Michael's the only person I believe they really tried to railroad like that because of what he did with the publishing in the music industry.
He talked about it all the time. He talked about it all the time. One thing I will say is that in the studio, he would always talk about how he lived in a certain fear. And I used to always try to reel him in a direction like, yo, you only supposed to fear God. Man shouldn't have you feeling like that. No man should have you living in that space. But he lived in that space a lot because he felt like he had something that was so valuable, which he did. He had something so valuable that people wanted.
He owned like half of Sony ATV's publishing, right?
Yeah, I think what people have confused, I'm glad you said that way, because I think people have confused the narrative. People for so long have said, Michael owned the Beatles catalog.
I heard that.
No, Michael owned Sony ATV.
That's right.
Which is Babyface, Mariah, the Beatles.
Beyonce.
Probably some of my catalog was in there.
Now, think about the ripple effect. If Michael could give back publishing to artists like Little Richard, what would stop him from doing it for others? If he inspired musicians to demand ownership, labels could lose billions, and that's when whispers began. Allegations, scandals, lawsuits. Many believe these weren't just random storms. They looked more like a pattern designed to weaken Michael's hold.
He wanted back.
You think they threw all those cases at Michael because they wanted it back?
I think it could have had something to do with it. I'm not going to say exactly that, but it could have had something to do with it. But I believe none of it because I was around Mike all the time and I knew the kind of person he was. So I'm like, they really trying to kill his character.
Yeah, I don't believe
And
it.
he would say it, like, he'd be like, they just can't stand that I'm the greatest. He would literally say that.
The truth is simple. Michael Jackson wasn't just the king of pop. He was a mogul holding the keys to the castle. That catalog gave him wealth, power, and the ability to call shots in an industry that had always silenced black artists before him. And for some, that was a line too far. But if the catalog made him powerful, it also made him a target, which begs the question, who would benefit if Michael's empire collapsed? And what happened next would shock even his closest allies. Power doesn't come without enemies. And for Michael Jackson, the attacks began long before his final days. One of the most painful blows didn't come from the media or a rival. It came from inside his own family, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. In 1993, the world was rocked when Michael faced his first major allegations. The timing was suspicious. He was at the height of his career, and his publishing empire was stronger than ever. Then suddenly, headlines exploded with stories that threatened to destroy everything he had built. To make matters worse, Michael's own sister LaToya Jackson stepped in front of cameras and appeared to confirm the accusations. She claimed her brother had been writing checks to families of young boys and implied there was truth behind the headlines. For many fans, hearing those words from his own blood felt like betrayal, but the story wasn't so simple. Behind LaToya stood her then-husband, Jack Gordon, a man with a reputation for manipulation and control. Years later, LaToya revealed the truth. She had been forced to make those statements. Gordon allegedly isolated her from her family, brainwashed her, and even abused her. He convinced her that her own relatives were out to harm her and pressured her into staging that press conference. According to LaToya, Gordon even arranged for her to demand $500,000 from the highest bidder in exchange for so-called proof against Michael, proof that never existed. Looking back, it's clear this wasn't a case of a sister turning on her brother. It was a calculated setup. LaToya later admitted she had no evidence against Michael and had been living in fear under Gordon's control. She described how he beat her with household objects, dictated every move she made, and cut her off from the rest of her family. In her own words, she was trapped in a cycle of manipulation so deep that she couldn't see a way out. For Michael, the damage was already done. Even though LaToya eventually retracted her words and divorced Gordon, the media didn't care about the retraction. They cared about the headlines. They ran with the narrative that even Michael's sister believed he was guilty, and that fueled the fire of public doubt. The image of a family divided became a weapon used against him. Industry insiders point to this episode as one of the first signs of a larger campaign. The pattern was clear. Isolate Michael, damage his reputation, and weaken his power base. And the fact that Gordon allegedly had ties beyond just LaToya's life raised even more questions. Who benefited from dragging Michael's name through the mud? Who stood to gain from planting seeds of distrust right when his empire was expanding? The truth is, LaToya wasn't just a pawn in her husband's twisted game. She was part of a strategy that chipped away at Michael's public image. Once the doubt was planted, it never fully disappeared. Even when she cleared her brother's name, the world had already seen the cracks. This moment matters because it shows how carefully timed these smears could be. Just as Michael's business power reached new heights, the world was flooded with narratives meant to pull him down, and when those stories came from inside his own family, they hit harder than any tabloid headline. For Michael, the betrayal cut deep. For the industry, it was the first taste of how vulnerable even the king of pop could be when whispers turned into scandals. But this was only the beginning, because as powerful as those early smears were, what came next would raise even bigger questions about who was really pulling the strings and why Michael's circle was suddenly changing in ways no one could explain. When Michael Jackson collapsed on June 25, 2009, the world expected one thing, that his doctor would call for help immediately. But according to reports, that's not what happened. Instead, before dialing 911, Conrad Murray allegedly reached out to a man named Fahim Muhammad. And here's the thing, Fahim wasn't a paramedic, wasn't a nurse, wasn't a doctor, he was a bodyguard. So why was he the first person Murray supposedly called? That question has haunted fans and investigators for years, because in moments when every second could mean life or death, it made no sense to call security before calling an ambulance. Unless, of course, there was something that needed to be managed before authorities arrived. Who exactly was Fahim Muhammad? To most, he seemed like just another member of Michael's security team, but insiders whisper he was far more connected than people realized. Some claim he had ties to powerful figures figures in the music industry, most notably Diddy, and that he was the kind of man people called when a situation had to be handled quietly. Whether those whispers are true or not, the suspicion alone raises eyebrows. Here's another strange detail. Fahim had only started working as Michael's head of security less than a year before the singer's death. Before that, he was barely a presence in Michael's world. Then, almost overnight, he was suddenly at the center of everything. For family members, it looked like he had been planted there, inserted into Michael's tight circle at the most vulnerable moment of his life. And it wasn't just the timing. In court testimonies, Fahim described entering Michael's bedroom after the collapse. He claimed Murray shouted at him to get help from another guard. But the timeline has always been messy. Reports say valuable minutes were lost while confusion spread through the house. By the time paramedics arrived, too much time had passed, too many chances to save Michael had slipped away. To Michael's siblings, this detail was more than suspicious. It was chilling. Why would a new bodyguard suddenly hold so much influence in those final hours? Why was his presence stronger than that of Michael's own family, who were kept at a distance? Janet later admitted she wasn't even allowed to see her brother freely in his last weeks. The only people around him were Murray, a handful of staff, and Fahim.
No, the last time I saw Mike was maybe a month before. I was giving my parents a surprise party.
And
So
he
we were
came for
all
that.
there. We were all there.
The last time you saw Michael was around your birthday.
2 days before my birthday.
Even more unsettling are the parallels. In later lawsuits and exposés tied to Diddy, Fahim's name appears again. Allegations suggest he wasn't just muscle, he was someone who cleaned up problems behind the scenes. If that reputation holds any truth, then his role in Michael's final hours deserves closer scrutiny, because if the first call wasn't to 911, but to a man known for handling sensitive situations, fans can't help but wonder, was saving Michael ever the first priority? Of course, no court ever charged Fahim with wrongdoing. His testimony in Murray's trial positioned him as just another witness. But conspiracy theories don't need verdicts to grow. They thrive on gaps, on unexplained choices, on moments that don't add up. And in this story, Fahim Muhammad is one of those gaps. The bigger picture is this: Michael Jackson wasn't surrounded by his family in his last days. He wasn't guarded by people who had been with him for decades. Instead, his inner circle was filled with new faces, including one whose loyalty wasn't to him, but possibly to others with more power and darker motives. So the question lingers: was Fahim just doing his job, or was his role part of something larger? The mystery of why he was there, why he mattered, and why he was called first continues to fuel suspicion. And if you follow the trail, this was only one piece of the puzzle, because the doctor who stood by Michael's side, Conrad Murray, would become the official fall guy. But many believe his story was only the cover for a much bigger plot. And what happened next would throw that suspicion into overdrive. When the world learned that Michael Jackson had died, one name quickly rose to the center of the storm: Dr. Conrad Murray. He wasn't a longtime family doctor or a trusted friend from Michael's past. He was a relatively new figure, hired just months earlier to oversee Michael's health as he prepared for his comeback tour. This is it. On paper, his role was to protect Michael, but in reality, Murray's decisions would be forever linked to the King of Pop's final moments. The official cause of death was acute intoxication from propofol, a powerful anesthetic rarely used outside hospital settings. Murray admitted to giving Michael small doses to help him sleep. The problem? Propofol isn't meant to be used as a sleep aid. It requires specialized equipment, constant monitoring, and an intensive care environment. Murray had none of that. Instead, he reportedly administered it in a private bedroom with only basic tools and no backup plan if something went wrong. During his trial in 2011, prosecutors painted a devastating picture. They argued that Murray had been reckless, leaving Michael unattended while the drug was in his system. Witnesses said he delayed calling 911, and when paramedics finally arrived, they found an unresponsive Michael with no proper life-saving efforts underway. Murray's defense claimed he was simply trying to help a patient who begged for rest, but the jury didn't buy it. After weeks of testimony, Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison, of which he served about half. But here's where things get complicated. Even as Murray took the fall, Michael's family never accepted the idea that he acted alone. Janet has said she blames him for her brother's death, but she also hinted there were bigger forces at play. LaToya went further, openly calling Murray a scapegoat and insisting her brother had warned her that people were plotting to unalive him. For the Jackson family, Murray's conviction closed one chapter but left a bigger one wide open. Fans also couldn't ignore the contradictions. Why was a doctor being paid such a high salary, reportedly $150,000 a month, just to monitor sleep? Who was funding this arrangement? And why was Michael pushed to sign on for 50 shows when, according to his siblings, he had only agreed to 10? Murray may have been the man with the syringe, but many believed he was far from the mastermind. To this day, Murray maintains that he was unfairly blamed. He's given interviews calling himself the victim of a system that wanted a quick answer, and yet, the facts remain. He admitted to giving Michael a drug that should never have been used in that way, under conditions that were unsafe. That alone sealed his role in history. But even with a conviction, questions refuse refused to die? Why did it take so long to call for emergency help? Why was the first call allegedly to a bodyguard instead of an ambulance? And why were Michael's closest family members kept at a distance in those critical weeks? For the public, Murray became the face of tragedy. For conspiracy theorists, he became proof that someone needed a fall guy to shield the real players behind the curtain. Because if you look past the trial and verdict, the story doesn't end with a single doctor making reckless choices. It stretches into boardrooms, record labels, and powerful names who may have had more to gain from Michael's silence than anyone else. Murray's conviction tied up the legal side, but for fans and family, it only confirmed what they had feared all along, that Michael's death wasn't just about negligence, it was about control, money, and influence. And according to Janet, the shadows behind it included names no one expected, because while Murray sat in court, other figures were moving behind the scenes, untouched and unchallenged. And that's where Janet's shocking claims pushed the story into new explosive territory. Janet Jackson has never been one to chase headlines with wild stories. For most of her career, she's stayed private, even when the tabloids begged for drama. That's why her recent words hit harder than anyone expected, because this time, she didn't just talk about her brother's tragic passing. She pointed fingers, and the names she hinted at left fans stunned. According to Janet, Michael's downfall wasn't just the result of one doctor's mistakes. She believes there were powerful figures in the industry working quietly to isolate him, weaken him, and eventually push him out of the way. In her view, Conrad Murray was only the face of a much larger machine, and the people she ties to that machine, none other than Jay-Z and his longtime ally Diddy. Janet has suggested that this wasn't about rivalry in music charts, it was about control. Michael owned half of Sony ATV, a catalog so valuable it gave him leverage over the entire industry.
So I'm leaving Sony a free agent, owning half of Sony. So I own half of Sony's publishing, and I'm leaving them, and they're very angry at me because of it. But I just did good business, you know. So.
He wasn't just an artist, he was a power player who could change who got paid and who didn't. Janet claims that once Michael reached that level, doors started closing around him. Business deals went sour, old friends turned into strangers, and whispers about his private life seemed to appear out of thin air. To her, it looked like a campaign, not a coincidence. She points to the strange shifts in Michael's circle before his death. Family members, including herself, were suddenly pushed to the sidelines. She has said she wasn't allowed to spend much time with him in his final weeks. Instead, new faces appeared: doctors, bodyguards, advisors, people she didn't fully trust. And in her eyes, those people weren't just random hires, they were strategically placed. One of Janet's most explosive suggestions is that Jay-Z himself moved pieces behind the scenes to block Michael at key points. She hinted that their connection wasn't friendly collaboration, but quiet competition that turned into betrayal. And with Diddy often standing nearby, the picture becomes even darker. To some fans, it sounds like a plot: isolate Michael, damage his image, and leave him too weak to fight back. Now, it's important to note, these are claims, not proven facts. Janet hasn't produced documents or recordings. What she has shared are her personal experiences, her memories, and her sense of the forces pressing in on her brother. Still, when someone as respected as Janet Jackson speaks up, people listen, and the timing of her words couldn't be more critical. Because now, in the wake of new lawsuits and old scandals resurfacing around figures like Diddy, Janet's story doesn't sound as far-fetched as it once did. Fans are starting to connect the dots. Michael's immense power, the sudden rise of other moguls, and the way his image was torn apart in the media, put together, it paints a chilling possibility that his career, and maybe even his life, were sabotaged on purpose. For Janet, this isn't about theories, it's about truth. She believes her brother was targeted, and she refuses to let the story end with a single scapegoat. Her claims don't just challenge the official narrative, they demand that fans look deeper at the forces shaping the music industry. And if even part of what she says is true, then the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was historic. But if Janet's claims raise eyebrows, what happened right after Michael's death raises them even higher, because within days, industry moves began falling into place, almost as if someone had been waiting for the moment. And the timing of those deals makes her allegations look less like speculation and more like a warning sign. If there's one thing the music business proves time and time again, it's that timing is never random. And when Michael Jackson passed on June 25, 2009, what came next raised serious questions about who stood to benefit. Because within days of the King of Pop's death, deals and announcements began rolling out, moves that looked almost too convenient for certain powerful names. Let's start with the catalog. At the time of his death, Michael owned a massive stake in Sony/ATV, Sony, the publishing giant that held the Beatles catalog and hundreds of other legendary works. That share was worth hundreds of millions, maybe even billions. But Michael was deep in debt, and his estate quickly became tangled in financial negotiations. Almost overnight, control over his catalog shifted from his hands to the estate's managers and business partners. For fans, this looked like the exact outcome Michael had feared, his life's most valuable asset slipping away while he wasn't there to protect it. And then came another twist. Just 5 days after Michael's passing, Jay-Z's Roc Nation announced a new distribution deal with Sony Music. On its own, that might sound like business as usual, but the timing, fans couldn't ignore it. The biggest artist in the world dies. His grip on Sony's publishing weakens, and suddenly another major mogul is stepping into fresh partnership with the same company. For people who already believed Janet's claims, this felt like a smoking gun. Critics will argue that the deal had likely been in the works long before Michael's passing. And that's true. These kinds of contracts don't appear overnight. But conspiracy doesn't always hinge on paperwork. Sometimes it's about who gets positioned where and when. And to Janet, the fact that Jay-Z's rise aligned so neatly with her brother's fall is too sharp to ignore. There's also the wider industry pattern. Michael wasn't the only legend whose influence seemed to shrink while others gained ground. Prince fought his own battles against labels, even writing "slave" on his face to protest being controlled. Yet when Michael passed, it wasn't artists like him who benefited. It was the corporate machines and the moguls willing to play by their rules. Deals expanded, partnerships flourished, and the vacuum left by Michael's absence became a power grab. To many fans, this confirmed what Michael had been saying privately for years, that he was surrounded by forces who wanted him gone, not just as a person, but as a competitor in the business world. His death didn't just leave a cultural void, it opened the door for others to secure the very power he once held. Now, none of this proves direct involvement, but the alignment of events is enough to keep the suspicion alive. Michael gone, his catalog in flux, Sony securing more control, Jay-Z's Roc Nation stepping into fresh deals, and Diddy still a giant, avoiding scandals that seemed to hit every other major star. For Janet, these weren't coincidences, they were signs of a strategy, one that isolated Michael until he was vulnerable, then capitalized on his absence. And whether you believe her or not, the timing is impossible to overlook. But the question goes deeper than contracts and deals, because while the business world was moving quickly, Michael's own family was being pushed further away, and according to them, that isolation wasn't an accident, it was part of the plan. What they describe about his final weeks paints a picture darker than any boardroom move, and what happened to the King of Pop inside his own home left scars his family still can't explain. If you really want to understand why the Jackson family has never accepted the official story, you have to listen to their testimony. To them, Michael's final months weren't just about rehearsals and comeback dreams, they were about distance, locked doors, and a growing wall between Michael and the people who loved him most. And that isolation, they say, was no accident.
Where were you when you heard?
I was at home in New York. I was at my house in New York. You know, another day, another morning. And I get a call.
Yep.
Headed to the hospital.
And you headed to the airport?
Not at that very moment. I didn't know the severity of it. No one knew. I can't remember exactly who I wound up calling back to see how things were going, and that's when they told me he had passed.
He had passed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Janet has admitted that in the weeks leading up to his death, she barely saw her brother. She recalled trying to spend time with him, but being told he was too busy or too tired. She hinted that the people running his schedule had intentionally kept her away. When she finally saw him, just weeks before his passing, it was brief, 2 days before her birthday. That would be the last time she looked him in the eye. For someone as close as Janet, that distance was heartbreaking. LaToya went even further. She has repeatedly claimed Michael warned her directly that people were plotting against him. He told her he feared for his life, that they were going to unalive him, and that he didn't feel in control anymore.
You believe it may have been murder. Do you still think that?
Absolutely.
Why?
Absolutely.
Why are you so sure?
I would never, ever think differently. Because first of all, Michael told me that they were going to murder him. He was afraid. He was afraid for his life. Who was going to murder him? The people that were involved in his life, the people that were controlling him. This book, Starting Over, is about my life. And it's about Michael's life. It's the parallel between the two of our lives. We share that same life where people come into your life, wiggle their way in, control you, manipulate, control your funds, your finances, everything that you have, and you must do what they tell you to do. And that's what Michael was going through. And he knew that everything that was happening to him was not kosher, it wasn't right, and it disturbed him greatly. And he kept saying it over and over and over again. Yes, Dr. Murray was the fall guy, but it's more to it than just that. He named names. He told me people. He told me to be careful of this one and that one. And in the beginning, I didn't, it's not that I didn't believe him.
Who were the people that he was saying?
People that surrounded themselves around him, people that worked with him. People that were with him the last days.
Any specific names?
Michael wasn't capable of doing these shows that he was supposed to do. Michael only agreed to do 10, and it's because they had him on such a tight...
To LaToya, those weren't paranoid ramblings. They were desperate cries for help. And when Conrad Murray became the face of the tragedy, she insisted he was only a fall guy. The real players, she argued, were the ones who had forced Michael into isolation. Then there's Paris, Michael's daughter, whose words still echo with grief. She has said she remembers her father crying, complaining that he was cold, cut off, and powerless. Phones had been disconnected, visitors turned away, and even his own children often felt the tension in the house. Years later, Paris admitted she still wants answers about what really happened. She believes her father didn't just fade away. He was taken from her too soon, surrounded by people who didn't have his best interests at heart. To the family, the pattern was clear. Michael had been boxed in. Every attempt to step in, every effort to check on him, was blocked by handlers, guards, or Murray himself. Janet described it as a controlled environment. Michael kept on pills, convinced everything was normal, while his loved ones were sidelined. For them, it felt like watching him disappear into a bubble, one they couldn't break through until it was too late.
Working with emotion, and I actually had to walk out of the room. So it was just too much for me to handle.
So, do you blame Dr. Murray for your brother's death?
Yes, I do. He is the one that was administering the drug, as from what I do know.
The emotional weight of their testimony is heavy. This isn't just speculation from fans online, it's his own sisters, his daughter, his closest blood, saying they saw the walls go up around him, and the way they describe it makes the official version of events feel incomplete at best. Critics will say grief clouds judgment, that families want someone to blame when tragedy strikes, but the consistency of their stories, the warnings Michael gave, the sudden distance, the timing of it all paints a picture that's hard to ignore. When the people closest to him all say the same thing, it raises questions no verdict can erase. For fans, this family testimony doesn't just reopen wounds, it reshapes the story. It suggests Michael's death wasn't a random accident or a single doctor's mistake. It was the final act in a long campaign of control, one that left the king of pop surrounded by strangers and stripped of the support he trusted most. And that brings us to the final difficult step, separating what we know for certain from what remains in the shadows. Because if Conrad Murray was the face and isolation was the method, then what do the facts prove, and where do the allegations still live? The answer could change how we remember Michael forever. By now, the story of Michael Jackson's final years sounds like a maze of secrets, betrayals, and whispered plots. But before we draw conclusions, it's important to separate what's proven fact from what's still allegation, because if we don't, truth and rumor risk blending into one. And for someone as important as Michael, clarity matters. Here's what we know for certain. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died of acute propofol intoxication. That's not theory, it's written in his autopsy report. Propofol is a powerful anesthetic, and Michael's personal physician, Conrad Murray, admitted to giving it to him in an unsafe environment. In 2011, a jury convicted Murray of involuntary manslaughter. He served nearly 2 years in prison before being released. Those facts are part of the official record, locked into history. It's also confirmed that Michael was one of the most powerful music businessmen of his era. He purchased ATV Music in 1985, securing the Beatles' catalog, and later merged it with Sony, creating Sony ATV. That catalog grew into one of the largest in the world, controlling works from artists like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and more. At the time of his passing, Michael's stake in that catalog was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That power is fact, not speculation. But here's where the line starts to blur. Family members, including Janet, LaToya, and Paris, have long claimed Michael was isolated and manipulated in his final months. Janet has said she was kept away. LaToya insists her brother told her people were plotting against him. Paris has spoken about her father crying and feeling powerless. These are personal testimonies, not courtroom evidence. They're powerful, emotional, and consistent, but still in the category of allegation. Then there are the more explosive claims that Jay-Z or Diddy played a role in orchestrating Michael's downfall, that business deals were lined up to benefit from his absence, or that key figures were planted in his inner circle. These details live in the world of suspicion. Yes, Jay-Z's Roc Nation did announce a distribution deal with Sony shortly after Michael's death, but there's no proof it was connected to Michael's passing. Yes, Fahim Muhammad was part of Michael's security and was reportedly present that night, but no court ever found him guilty of wrongdoing. And yes, Michael's estate shifted after his death, but that's standard when someone of his wealth passes unexpectedly. What we're left with is a split screen. On one side, the facts, a fatal overdose, a reckless doctor, a legendary catalog, and a family still grieving. On the other side, the allegations. Industry moguls plotting in the shadows, isolation tactics, and suspicious timing around deals. The overlap between the two is where theories thrive, because the unanswered questions leave just enough room for suspicion to grow. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Michael Jackson himself reportedly told his family he feared he would be targeted. When someone that famous says something like that and then tragedy follows, it's impossible not to wonder. Was he simply voicing paranoia, or was he warning the world in advance? For now, the public record gives us pieces, but not the whole puzzle. Allegations fill the gaps, shaping a story that feels both chilling and incomplete. And until hard evidence surfaces to confirm or deny them, those two sides will continue to battle for the truth. But one thing is certain, Michael's legacy, his genius, and his influence remain untouchable. And that may be the very reason people still fight over the story of how it all ended. Because the King of Pop's life was more than music, it was power. And power always leaves behind questions. But that wasn't the end of it. Because while the world still debates what's fact and what's rumor, Michael's family refuses to stay silent. And in their voices lies the push for answers that may one day break this mystery wide open. Michael Jackson's story will always be more than just music. He wasn't only the King of Pop, he was a man who dared to take control of his art, his money, and his future. And that power came with a price. The official record says his life ended because of one doctor's negligence, but his family, his closest circle, and millions of fans believe there was something much bigger at play. Janet's recent words don't just stir old wounds, they reignite questions that have never been fully answered. Was Michael's death the tragic result of bad medical care, or was it part of a larger design to strip him of influence? The timing of business deals, the sudden isolation, and the family's own testimony all leave a trail of shadows. And when the people who knew him best say he warned them of danger, it's hard to dismiss those warnings as simple fear. The truth is, Michael's legacy still carries weight. His catalog, his voice, and his impact remain unmatched. And maybe that's why this story refuses to die, because the world knows we haven't heard the last of it. So, what do you think? Was the King of Pop betrayed by the very industry he helped build? Or are we seeing patterns where none exist? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what side you're on. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because more revelations are coming. And the next one could change everything we thought we knew about Michael Jackson's final days. The fight for truth isn't over, and neither is this story.